Hi everyone, welcome to our first counterpoint exercise in 3 parts. Today's format is going to be a little bit different than usual. Rather than realizing a cantus from scratch, I'll be taking an existing solution by a Reddit user and picking it apart. For those who don't know, I host a monthly counterpoint challenge on the music theory subreddit. I had quite a few submissions this month and wanted to highlight some common but subtle errors that kept popping up. With that said, let's jump right in and listen to this cantus. Okay, here we have TELOPE'S solution. Shout out to TELOPE for letting me use their solution. Let's take a listen. It's not bad, but it sounds a little too jagged and unnatural. Let's see why that's so. Take a look at these 2 leaps in the bass. We'll start with the second one. Those who have studied counterpoint probably know that when we leap, we generally like to balance our leaps, preferably by step, but if not, at least with some sort of motion in the opposite direction. Here we can see the downward leap from G to C being balanced with an upward leap from C to F. No qualms here. Now, what doesn't get discussed often is what should happen before the leap. Notice A moves down by step to G, and that G leaps down to C. In other words, we're leaping in the same direction that we were already going, and this isn't ideal. Why? Imagine you're walking down a hill and someone suddenly pushes you. What's going to happen? You're going to fall down the hill. Musically speaking, the effect isn't much different. It's awkward and abrupt. Instead, whenever possible, we want to approach the leap in the opposite direction of that leap. It's kind of like we're balancing the leap before it happens. Take a look at this octave leap TELOPE wrote. This leap is actually very well executed because it balances itself on both ends. The A leaps in the opposite direction it was approached and leaves the leap with motion in the opposite direction as well. If you imagine arrows when writing leaps, which is something I highly recommend everyone does, you'll find that leaps ideally look like zigzags, as shown here. If we go back to the first leap from E to C, we can see the same problem, except here it's worse because the leap isn't balanced in either direction. It's just continuous downward motion, which further exaggerates this tumbling down a hill feel. To clarify, balancing a leap on both ends isn't always possible, so this isn't a hard rule. For example, notice I didn't consider this leap in the soprano as erroneous. Yes, it leaps in the same direction it was already going, but because it's immediately followed with a long stepwise line moving upwards after the fact, the awkward leap is compensated for. In fact, I have more of a problem with this major 6th leap even though it's treated perfectly. So the problem with this leap isn't actually the leap per se, but the fact that it leads us to an unsatisfactory climax. As I've mentioned in previous videos, a climax should have presence and authority. Here, however, the climax sounds weak. There are 2 main reasons for this. For one, it's an incomplete chord. Incomplete chords sound thinner and emptier than complete chords. Secondly, not only is it an incomplete chord, but it's an incomplete chord that only contains a 6th. 6th chords sound extremely weak when unaccompanied by the 3rd. It's almost equivalent to writing a bare 5th. In fact, this 6 is kind of sort of a camouflaged bare 5th. For those who have been keeping up with my videos for some time now, you know that our ear remembers the previous note we leapt from. Generally, we exploit this principle to give the illusion of dissonance. Here, however, the principle is working against us. Because the C lingers in our ear, it's almost as if we have a triple C with an A on top. The result? The A sounds like an incomplete neighbor that wants to resolve down to G. Take a listen. First I'll play the normal chord as written, and then I'll play the chord and resolve the A. So in general, when writing an incomplete chord, aim to have at least the 3rd in there. The 3rd is more stable and full than the 6th. This is the bass line I suggested for TELOPE. For those careful observers, you may have noticed myself doing exactly what I said you shouldn't do. Here I've leapt downwards without balancing the leap in either direction. But it's justifiable. The leap here is indeed balanced, only it's delayed with a lower neighboring figure FEF. Furthermore, it's always important to look at the totality of the phrase. This whole line is really working as a unit to balance this initial leap of a minor sixth. The major third leap from A to F is a smaller part of a greater whole. Let's take a listen. After giving Telope the bass, they came up with this for their soprano. Interestingly enough, their solution was exactly what I got. This, however, isn't that surprising. Once a strong bass line is established, the rest practically writes itself. Let's listen to this and pick it apart a bit. Notice all the expressive lingering dissonances involved. The first implies a seventh chord, the second a 6-5 chord, the third a seventh, the fourth a ninth chord, and the fifth a seventh chord. Lingering dissonances are particularly effective in 3 or more voices because we can now imply full seventh and ninth chords and their inversions. At bar 5, we have that vertical sonority of a sixth plus an octave that I said should be avoided, but here it works because it doesn't carry a lot of weight. It's just there to smoothen out the melodic contour of each voice, so we don't mind if the vertical sonority happens to be a little weak at that moment. Funny enough, every quote-unquote error I pointed out in Telope's realization, I myself implemented in the quote-unquote corrected version. I wanted to show that there is wiggle room in counterpoint. There are gray areas when it comes to following certain contrapuntal tendencies, but knowing when it's acceptable to deviate from these tendencies, that's something that the textbooks won't teach us. It takes, above all, a teacher, experience, and just practice. Counterpoint is to a composer kind of like what technical studies are to an instrumentalist. The more you do it, especially with a teacher, the better you're going to get at it. The more subtleties you'll be able to notice and exploit. Thanks for tuning in. Next video, we'll take a look at a second species 3-part exercise. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Back to the Basics for more content. Thanks again and see you next time.